The Wyoming wilderness stretched endlessly before Michael Thompson as the blizzard intensified, turning the familiar hunting trail into an alien landscape of swirling white. He'd been tracking elk for 3 days through the Bridger-Teton National Forest when a storm hit with unprecedented fury. Now, compass spinning uselessly in the magnetic interference of the mountain peaks, he was completely lost. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the past hour. His breath formed ice crystals that clung to his beard, and despite his insulated gear, the cold was seeping through every layer. The wind howled through the towering pines and aspens like something alive and angry, bending the trees until their branches groaned in protest. Michael checked his rifle with numb fingers. 1 bullet left. He'd used the others for hunting, never imagining he'd need them for survival signals. The irony wasn't lost on him. A lifetime of hunting in these mountains, and now the wilderness might claim him. His watch read 4:30 p.m., but the storm had turned day into a twilight gray. In these mountains, full darkness would bring temperatures well below zero. Without shelter, without a way to signal for help, he had maybe 2 hours before hypothermia set in seriously. The forest around him was breathtaking, even in its danger. Massive Douglas firs stood like cathedral pillars, their branches heavy with snow that caught what little light penetrated the storm clouds. The silence between wind gusts was profound, broken only by the soft whisper of falling snow and the distant crack of a tree branch surrendering to the weight of ice. Michael's hands were losing feeling despite his gloves. He flexed his fingers, trying to maintain circulation, but knew the signs. The first stage of frostbite was setting in. His feet, too, were beginning to lose sensation in his boots. He had to make a decision. Use his last bullet as a signal shot and hope someone heard it, or save it for protection against whatever predators might be drawn by his increasingly desperate situation. Bears were hibernating, but mountain lions and wolves still roamed these peaks. The wind died for a moment, and in that brief silence, Michael made his choice. He raised his rifle toward the gray sky and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed off the mountain faces, seeming to bounce from peak to peak before fading into the storm's roar. Now he was truly defenseless, armed only with a hunting knife and his wits. As the echo faded, Michael strained to listen for any response, a shout, an engine, anything that might indicate help was coming. But there was only the wind picking up again, driving snow into his face like tiny needles. He began looking for any kind of natural shelter. The storm was worsening, and standing in the open would be suicide. Behind a cluster of boulders, he found a slight depression in the ground, partially protected by an overhanging ledge of rock. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Using his knife, Michael began cutting pine boughs to create insulation between his body and the frozen ground. His movements were becoming sluggish, his thinking clouded by the cold. He knew these were dangerous signs, but forced himself to keep working. The beauty of the winter forest seemed almost mocking now. Icicles hung like crystal daggers from every surface, and the snow-laden trees created a landscape of pristine white silence. In different circumstances, he would have marveled at the scene. Now, it represented a stunning indifference to his survival. As darkness began to fall in earnest, Michael huddled in his makeshift shelter, trying to conserve what body heat he had left. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it was getting worse. He closed his eyes and tried to think of his wife Sarah back in Jackson Hole, probably starting to worry about his delayed return. His son Jake, just starting college in Colorado. Would they organize a search party? In this weather, it could be days before anyone could safely venture into the mountains. The cold was winning. Michael could feel his core temperature dropping, his thoughts becoming scattered. This was how it ended for too many in the wilderness. Not with drama or violence, but with the simple, implacable power of winter in the mountains. Somewhere in the storm, something howled, long, mournful, wild. Michael's eyes snapped open. Wolves. They were closer than he'd thought. Two young wolf pups, barely 6 months old, had been exploring the edges of their territory when a sharp crack of the gunshot echoed through their mountain home. Scout and Shadow, as their mother had taken to thinking of them, were the most curious and adventurous of this season's litter. Scout, slightly larger with distinctive white markings on his chest, tilted his head at the strange sound. It wasn't thunder, too sharp, too brief. It wasn't the crack of a falling tree, too loud, too sudden. In their young lives spent in the Yellowstone ecosystem, they'd never heard anything quite like it. Shadow, smaller but quicker, was already moving toward the source of the sound, her dark fur barely visible against the storm-darkened trees. Scout followed, both pups driven by the irrepressible curiosity that made their mother constantly anxious for their safety. The scent hit them before they saw anything, a strange, complex smell that was both familiar and foreign. It had elements they recognized: fear, exhaustion, the metallic tang of cold metal. But underneath was something else, something that spoke of a world beyond their forest home. As they crested a small ridge, moving with the natural stealth of their kind despite their youth, they saw him. A large creature, unlike anything in their experience, huddled against the rocks. It was bigger than a deer, but shaped differently, and it smelled wrong. Not prey, not predator, but something entirely other. Scout approached first, his natural boldness overriding any sense of caution. The creature didn't move like injured prey. There was no frantic struggle, no desperate attempt to flee. Instead, it seemed almost still, too still. Shadow circled wide, her instincts telling her to be careful, but her curiosity pulling her closer. The creature's scent was growing stronger, and with it came something that surprised her: distress. Not the sharp terror of hunted prey, but a deeper sadness, a resigned despair that somehow called to something in her young heart. The pups had learned to read the emotional states of their pack, to understand the subtle communications of wolf society. This creature, whatever it was broadcasting pain and hopelessness as clearly as any wolf might. Scout crept closer, close enough now to see the rise and fall of the creature's breathing. It was alive, but its breathing was shallow, labored. The pup had seen enough injured animals to recognize the signs of something very wrong. A gust of wind brought fresh snow swirling around them, and the creature stirred slightly. For a moment, its eyes opened, strange, pale eyes unlike the golden or brown eyes of any animal the pups knew. Those eyes looked directly at Scout, and instead of the aggressive challenge he might expect from an unknown animal, he saw only exhaustion and something that looked almost like acceptance. The creature, the human, though the pups had no word for it, wasn't going to hurt them. Somehow, Scout knew this with absolute certainty. This being was no threat. If anything, it needed help. Shadow had completed her circle and now approached from the other side. The human's eyes tracked to her, the same expression of weary defeat. No agresión, no territorial display. Just the unmistakable signature of a creature in desperate need. The pups exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless way of their kind. They'd found something important, something that required the attention of the adults. But how to make them understand? How to convince the pack that this strange creature needed their help? Scout began to whine softly, a sound designed to carry through the storm without being too loud. It was the call pups used when they'd found something significant. Not danger, not food, but something that required investigation. Shadow joined in, their voices harmonizing in a way that would be unmistakable to any adult wolf within hearing range. The human stirred again at their sounds, and this time managed to lift his head slightly. When he saw them clearly, two young wolves standing just meters away, his eyes widened, but still no aggression. Instead, something that might have been wonder flickered across his features. Scout took another step closer. The human didn't move away, didn't shout or make threatening gestures. If anything, he seemed to be trying to make himself appear smaller, less threatening. It was behavior the pup recognized from submissive pack members, a signal of peaceful intent. Emboldened, Shadow approached as well. Soon both pups were close enough to see the human clearly. The strange coverings that weren't fur, the pale skin where it was exposed, the way his body shook with cold. Everything about him spoke of a creature poorly adapted for survival in this environment. The pups continued their calling, their voices now urgent. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was a rescue mission. Somehow, these two young wolves had decided that this strange, helpless creature needed their pack's protection. In the distance, carried on the wind, came an answering howl. Deep, authoritative, their mother's voice, acknowledging their call and promising investigation. Soon, the adults would come. Soon, the pack would decide what to do about their discovery. Scout and Shadow settled into a patient watch, their bodies creating a small windbreak for the shivering human. They didn't understand what he was, but they understood need when they saw it. And in the ancient code of their kind, need called for response. Luna had been following her pup's calls for nearly 20 minutes, fighting through snow that reached her chest in places. As the mother of 5 young wolves, she'd learned to distinguish between their various vocalizations: play, discovery, danger, and the particular urgency they were using now. This was something new, something important. The alpha female of her small pack, Luna carried the weight of keeping her family safe in an increasingly dangerous world. Humans had been expanding their presence in the territory, bringing their metal beasts that roared along the valleys and their strange scents that spoke of a world the wolves didn't understand. When she finally crested the ridge and saw what had captured her pup's attention, every instinct screamed at her to gather her young and retreat immediately. A human, the first she'd encountered at close range in her 5 years of life, sat propped against the rocks, with Scout and Shadow positioned protectively nearby. Luna's lips pulled back in an involuntary snarl. Humans meant danger. They were the creatures who had killed her own mother 3 years ago, who set the metal traps that could crush a wolf's leg, who brought the thunder sticks that could kill from a distance. Every generation of wolves learned to fear and avoid them. But as she prepared to call her pups away from this threat, something made her pause. The human wasn't behaving like the dangerous predator she'd expected. He sat motionless, making no aggressive moves toward her cubs. If anything, he seemed to be trying to make himself smaller, less threatening. More importantly, her pups weren't showing any signs of fear or aggression. Scout and Shadow were experienced enough to recognize real danger. They'd already learned to avoid bears, mountain lions, and the territorial disputes of adult wolves. Their body language now spoke of protectiveness, not alarm. Luna approached cautiously, every sense alert for signs of deception or hidden threat. The scent that reached her was complex: fear, exhaustion, cold, and underneath it all, something she hadn't expected: resignation. This human wasn't preparing to fight or flee. He was simply waiting. As she drew closer, she could see why. The human was clearly dying. His skin had taken on the grayish pallor she'd seen in prey animals near the end, and his breathing was shallow and labored. The cold was killing him, just as it had killed countless creatures in these mountains over the millennia. The rational part of Luna's mind told her to leave. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable, and helping this one could bring more of his kind searching through their territory. The survival of her pack had to come first. But another part of her mind, the part shaped by seasons of caring for vulnerable young, recognized something familiar in the situation. This human was as helpless as any newborn pup, as dependent on the mercy of others as her own children had been in their first weeks of life. Scout whined softly and looked up at her with his characteristic earnest expression. In his young mind, the situation was simple. Here was a creature in need, and they had the power to help. Shadow pressed closer to the human's side, sharing her body warmth in the ancient gesture of pack comfort. Luna found herself caught between the wisdom of ages and the immediate pull of compassion. Her cubs were teaching her something about the nature of mercy that transcended species boundaries. They saw need where she saw threat, opportunity for kindness where she saw only danger. The human's eyes focused on her with obvious effort, and in them she saw no malice or aggression, only a deep weariness and something that looked almost like gratitude. He understood that her pups were trying to help him, and instead of trying to capture or control them, he was simply accepting their gift. Luna made her decision with the swift certainty that it kept her alive and her pack safe through 5 harsh winters. Whatever this human was, whatever danger he might represent, right now, he was simply a dying creature her pups had chosen to protect, and she would not fail her children's first lesson in mercy. She approached slowly, still alert for any sudden movements, but projecting calm authority. The human watched her approach without fear, understanding somehow that his fate was being decided by forces beyond his control. When she was close enough, Luna added her own body warmth to the small shelter her pups had created. It was a decision that went against every survival instinct she developed, but felt right in a way she couldn't explain. The human's breathing became slightly easier as the combined warmth of 3 wolves began to raise his core temperature. He whispered something in his strange human language, sounds that meant nothing to her but carried the unmistakable tone of gratitude. Luna settled in for what might be a long vigil, her senses still alert for danger, but her heart committed to this unexpected act of cross-species compassion. Her pups had shown her that mercy could extend beyond the boundaries of pack and kind. Now came the harder question: what would happen when the rest of the pack arrived? The deep bass howl that echoed through the canyon announced the arrival of Gray Thunder, the pack's alpha male and Luna's mate. At 8 years old, he was ancient by wolf standards, his once dark coat now streaked with silver that gave him his name. Behind him came Moonwalker, the beta male, and Sage, the old female who served as the pack's memory keeper. Gray Thunder's massive frame materialized through the snow like something from legend. He'd led this pack through territorial disputes with 3 other wolf families, survived 2 harsh winters that had decimated wildlife populations, and guided them through the increasingly complex relationship with human encroachment on their territory. When he saw the scene before him, his mate and 2 of his pups clustered around a human, Gray Thunder's reaction was immediate and explosive. His hackles rose, his lips pulled back to reveal impressive canines, and a growl rumbled from deep in his chest that made the very air seem to vibrate. Luna met his gaze steadily, communicating in the complex language of pack hierarchy and marital partnership. Her posture acknowledged his authority while firmly defending her decision. The pups, sensing the tension between their parents, pressed closer to the human but didn't retreat. Moonwalker, younger and more impulsive, began to pace in an agitated circle. His instinct screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, a violation of every survival rule their species had developed over thousands of years. Humans were the enemy, the source of traps, poison, and the thunder sticks that could kill from impossible distances. But Sage, the eldest female, approached the scene with the deliberate care of one who had seen many seasons change. At 10 years old, she was a repository of pack wisdom, the keeper of stories and the final arbiter in disputes that couldn't be resolved by dominance displays. The old female studied the human with eyes that had witnessed the full spectrum of life in the wilderness. She'd seen humans before, tracked their movements through the territory, observed their strange behaviors, learned to read their moods and intentions from scent and posture. This human was different. Where others had carried the sharp scent of aggression and dominance, this one broadcast only exhaustion and acceptance. Where others had moved with the confident stride of apex predators, this one sat motionless, offering no challenge to their authority. Sage circled the group slowly, her experienced nose gathering information. The human had been carrying weapons. She could smell the metal and powder, but no longer posed a threat. His scent told her of prolonged exposure, dehydration, the beginning stages of hypothermia. He was dying, and he knew it. But more interesting was the scent signature of her pack members. Luna carried no fear smell, only the determined protectiveness she showed toward injured pack members. The pups radiated the excited energy they displayed when bringing gifts to the adults. A successful hunt, an interesting discovery, something that demanded acknowledgement and praise. Gray Thunder continued his threatening display, but his eyes were on Sage, waiting for her judgment. In the complex hierarchy of their pack, age and wisdom carried weight that even alpha dominance couldn't override. The old female's decision would influence them all. Sage completed her circle and sat down facing the human. For a long moment, wolf and man regarded each other across the vast evolutionary divide that separated their species. The human's pale eyes held no challenge, no attempt to establish dominance. Instead, she saw something she'd never encountered in a human before: respect. The old wolf had lived long enough to understand that survival sometimes required choices that defied conventional wisdom. She'd seen the pack take an orphan pups from rival families, nurse injured prey animals back to health before releasing them, and even share territory with creatures that might normally be competitors. More importantly, she understood the lesson her young pack members were teaching. These pups had found a creature in need and responded with compassion rather than aggression. To abandon that impulse would be to teach them that mercy was weakness, that species boundaries mattered more than individual suffering. Sage made a sound deep in her throat, not quite a whine, not quite a growl, that carried the weight of ancient authority. It was the sound of decision, of wisdom applied to an unprecedented situation. The message was clear: the human would be protected. Gray Thunder's growling ceased immediately. Moonwalker stopped his agitated pacing. Luna's posture relaxed as the pack's collective decision crystallized around them. The alpha male approached slowly, his massive head lowered in a gesture that was neither submission nor aggression, but rather acknowledgement of a situation beyond normal territorial rules. When he was close enough, he studied the human with the intense focus of a leader evaluating a potential threat or ally. What he saw convinced him. This human, whatever else he might be, was no immediate danger to his pack. The decision to help had been made by the pack's wisest members and endorsed by their strongest protector instincts as embodied in their young. Gray Thunder settled down beside Luna, adding his considerable bulk to the warming circle around the human. Moonwalker, accepting the pack's judgment despite his personal reservations, took position as sentry, alert for any approaching danger. The Council of Elders had spoken. The human would live if they could manage it. The precedent being set would echo through generations of wolf memory. But for now, survival demanded cooperation across species lines. In his semi-conscious state, Michael Thompson felt the presence of the large predators around him, but sensed no threat. Instead, there was warmth, protection, and something that felt almost like acceptance. Consciousness returned to Michael Thompson in stages, like surfacing from deep, dark water. First came awareness of warmth, blessed, life-giving warmth that seemed to surround him completely. Then came the realization that he was no longer alone. Bodies pressed against him from multiple sides, radiating heat and the steady rhythm of breathing. His eyes opened slowly, fighting against the lethargy of near hypothermia. Gray fur filled his vision, thick winter coats that moved with each breath. The scent hit him next. Wild, musky, unmistakably predator. Wolves. He was surrounded by wolves. Every human instinct screamed at him to move, to run, to defend himself. But his body wouldn't respond to the commands of his panicked mind. The cold had sapped his strength, leaving him as helpless as a newborn. More importantly, some deeper part of his consciousness recognized that these predators had already made their decision about him, and it wasn't the decision he would have expected. The largest wolf, a massive male with silver-streaked fur, lay along his left side. The animal's body heat soaked through Michael's jacket, warming him more effectively than any survival gear he'd ever owned. On his right, a smaller female pressed close, her steady breathing creating small clouds in the cold air that somehow spoke of contentment rather than predatory patience. The two younger wolves, barely more than large puppies, had positioned themselves at his feet and behind his back, creating a living furnace that was literally saving his life. One of them, the slightly larger male, occasionally lifted his head to look directly into Michael's face with eyes that seemed far too intelligent for comfort. Michael's mind struggled to process the situation. Everything he'd learned about wolves, every hunting story he'd heard, every nature documentary he'd watched, told him this was impossible. Wolves didn't rescue humans. They certainly didn't share body heat with potential prey. Yet here he was, alive because of their intervention. The warmth was spreading through his body now, bringing with it the painful tingling of returning circulation. His fingers, which had been numb for hours, began to ache as blood flow resumed. His toes burned inside his boots. The sensation was agony, but it was the agony of life returning to tissue that had been on the verge of freezing. As his core temperature rose, Michael's thinking became clearer. He could remember the shot, the desperate search for shelter, the growing certainty that he was going to die alone in the wilderness. The timeline after that became fuzzy, but somehow these wolves had found him and made the incomprehensible decision to save his life. The large male's eyes opened and focused on him with startling intelligence. For a moment, man and wolf regarded each other in silence. Two apex predators from vastly different worlds sharing an impossible intimacy. Michael saw no aggression in those amber eyes, no territorial challenge. Instead, there was something that looked almost like concern. "Thank you," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. The words felt inadequate, but they carried the weight of genuine gratitude. The wolf's ears twitched at the sound, but there was no startled retreat, no sudden wariness. Instead, the animal seemed to settle more comfortably against him. One of the pups, the smaller, darker one, raised her head and looked at him with unmistakable curiosity. Her expression held none of the wariness he would expect from a wild animal. Instead, she seemed almost pleased, as if his recovery was exactly what she'd hoped for. Michael tried to move his hand and, after several attempts, managed to lift it slightly. The motion caught the attention of all four wolves, but none of them pulled away. The female actually shifted position to accommodate his movement, ensuring that his warming continued without interruption. The storm was still raging outside their shelter, but the sound seemed muted now, less threatening. The steady breathing of his unlikely protectors created a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. For the first time in hours, Michael began to believe he might actually survive this ordeal. But survival raised new questions that his hypothermic mind hadn't been able to consider. What would happen when the storm passed? When other humans came looking for him? Would these wolves still be protective, or would their natural fear of humans reassert itself? More immediately, how long could this extraordinary situation continue? Wolves were wild animals with their own needs, their own territories to patrol, their own survival requirements. They couldn't maintain this rescue mission indefinitely. The large male seemed to sense his growing alertness. The wolf lifted his massive head and made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, that seemed intended to communicate something. The message was unclear to Michael, but the tone was unmistakably reassuring. As if responding to some unspoken signal, the female rose and moved away from the shelter. Michael felt the immediate loss of her warmth and had to suppress a surge of panic. But she returned quickly, carrying something in her mouth, dry branches and pine needles that she dropped near his feet. The intelligence behind the gesture took Michael's breath away. Somehow, these wolves understood that he needed fire, that his species created warmth differently than theirs. They were not just sharing their body heat. They were actively facilitating his survival in ways that went far beyond instinctual behavior. With shaking hands, Michael began to arrange the kindling they had provided. The wolves watched with obvious interest as he fumbled for his lighter, as if studying this strange human ritual of fire-making. When the first flame caught and began to spread among the dry needles, one of the pups made a soft sound that seemed almost like approval. Soon, a small but steady fire crackled between them, adding its warmth to the biological furnace the wolves had created. The combination was transforming his shelter from a place of desperate refuge into something that felt almost safe. As warmth returned to his body and hope returned to his heart, Michael Thompson found himself participating in what might be the most extraordinary rescue mission in the history of human-wolf relations. For while predators had chosen to save his life, and in doing so, they were teaching him lessons about survival, cooperation, and the boundaries between species that no textbook had ever contained. By dawn, Michael's strength had returned enough for him to sit up without assistance. Though the wolves remained close, their presence a constant reminder of his unlikely salvation. The storm had finally begun to subside, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white that sparkled in the first rays of sunlight filtering through the clouds. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but the wolves had taken turns throughout the night bringing dry wood and pine needles to keep it alive. Michael had watched in amazement as the large male, Gray Thunder, carefully placed branches near the flames without getting too close to the fire itself, a behavior that spoke of both intelligence and learned caution around human technology. Now, in the growing light, Michael could see his rescuers clearly for the first time. They were magnificent specimens, the adults powerfully built with thick winter coats, the pups already showing the promise of their future size and strength. But what struck him most was their behavior. They watched him with obvious intelligence, responding to his movements and needs in ways that suggested a level of understanding he'd never imagined possible. Scout, the larger pup, had appointed himself as Michael's primary caretaker. The young wolf brought him snow to melt for water, positioned himself as a windbreak when Michael needed to relieve himself, and even seemed to understand when a human needed space to move around and restore his circulation. Shadow, the smaller pup, had taken on the role of messenger, running back and forth between Michael and the adult wolves, carrying scents and presumably information that helped coordinate their rescue efforts. Her intelligence was remarkable. She seemed to understand cause and effect in ways that bordered on reasoning. Luna, the alpha female, had established herself as the coordinator of the operation. She directed the pup's activities with subtle body language, monitored Michael's condition with the focused attention of an experienced caregiver, and maintained communication with her mate through a series of quiet vocalizations that carried meaning Michael was beginning to recognize. Gray Thunder served as both protector and provider. The massive alpha male had disappeared twice during the night, returning each time with fresh meat that he placed near Michael's fire. The offering of food was perhaps the most extraordinary gesture of all. Predators simply didn't share their kills with other species, yet this wolf was actively ensuring Michael's nutritional needs were met. As the morning progressed, Michael found himself beginning to understand the subtle communication system the pack used. A particular tilt of Luna's head meant attention was needed. Gray Thunder's low rumble warned of potential danger from beyond their shelter. The pup's excited yipping indicated discovery or success. More remarkably, the wolves seemed to be learning his communication patterns as well. When Michael pointed toward something, they followed his gesture. When he made encouraging sounds, they appeared pleased. When he showed distress, they immediately gathered closer to provide comfort and protection. The breakthrough came when Scout approached carrying a thick branch, too thick for the fire, but perfect for other purposes. The pup dropped it near Michael's feet and then sat back, watching expectantly. It took Michael several minutes to understand what was being offered. A walking stick, support for his still weak legs when he needed to move around. "You understand, don't you?" Michael said softly, reaching out slowly to touch Scout's head. The pup didn't flinch away from the contact. Instead, he leaned into the touch, his tail giving a tentative wag that spoke of growing trust and perhaps even affection. The moment marked a turning point in their relationship. What had begun as a rescue mission was evolving into something approaching genuine communication between species. The wolves were not just keeping Michael alive. They were actively participating in his recovery, anticipating his needs, and adapting their behavior to accommodate his human limitations. Shadow demonstrated this growing understanding when she noticed Michael struggling to keep his gloves dry while tending the fire. The young female disappeared for several minutes, then returned with a flat piece of bark that she placed between his hands and the snow. The improvised glove had clearly been selected for its size and texture, a problem-solving behavior that went far beyond simple instinct. Luna's contribution was even more sophisticated. She had been watching Michael's attempts to create better insulation around his body, observing how he arranged pine boughs and tried to trap warm air in his clothing. When she saw him struggling with this task, she began systematically bringing him materials. Not just any materials, but specifically the items that would work best for his purposes. Gray Thunder's understanding manifested in his role as sentinel. The big wolf had learned to recognize the difference between Michael's movements when he was simply adjusting his position and when he was actually trying to get up for a specific purpose. He would rise to escort Michael when necessary, but remained resting when his protection wasn't needed. The communication wasn't just one way. Michael found himself learning to read wolf body language with increasing accuracy. He could tell when they were relaxed, when they were alert to potential threats, when they were pleased with something he had done. More importantly, he was learning to communicate his own needs and intentions in ways they could understand. When he needed to add wood to the fire, a particular gesture would bring one of the pups with appropriate materials. When he was too warm and needed space, a A different signal would cause the wolves to give him room while remaining protectively close. When he was cold, they would immediately close ranks around him without being asked. By midday, what had been a desperate rescue had evolved into a sophisticated interspecies partnership. 5 individuals from completely different evolutionary backgrounds had developed a functional communication system based on observation, empathy, and mutual respect. Michael Thompson, a man who had spent his life hunting in these mountains, was discovering that the boundary between human and animal intelligence was far more permeable than he had ever imagined. His rescuers weren't just following instinct. They were thinking, problem-solving, and adapting their behavior based on their growing understanding of his needs. The implications were staggering, but they would have to wait. Right now, he was simply grateful to be part of the most extraordinary conversation of his life. One conducted entirely without words, but rich with meaning nonetheless. As the second night fell over their mountain refuge, Michael discovered that his rescue had been organized with military precision. The wolves had established a watch rotation that ensured the fire never died and that potential threats were monitored throughout the dark hours. What impressed him most was the sophistication of their system. This wasn't random behavior, but coordinated strategy. Gray Thunder took the first watch, positioning himself where he could observe the approaches to their shelter while remaining close enough to add fuel to the fire when needed. The alpha male's technique for fire management was remarkably refined. He would use his paws to push burning logs together when the flames grew low, or carefully place new wood where it would catch without smothering the existing fire. Michael lay awake for much of that first watch period, mesmerized by the sight of a wild wolf tending a human fire with the skill of an experienced camper. The incongruity of the scene was overwhelming. Apex predator and primitive technology working together in perfect harmony. Around midnight, Luna smoothly took over the watch duties. Her approach was different from her mates. Where Gray Thunder focused on external threats, Luna concentrated on monitoring Michael's condition and the general welfare of the group. She would periodically approach to check his breathing, adjust the arrangement of warming bodies around him, and ensure that the smaller pack members were comfortable. During Luna's watch, Michael witnessed something that fundamentally changed his understanding of wolf intelligence. The fire began to die down, but instead of simply adding wood like her mate had done, Luna studied the problem for several minutes. The available fuel was wet from the recent storm and wouldn't catch easily from the small flames remaining in the embers. What happened next defied everything Michael thought he knew about animal behavior. Luna carefully selected the driest pieces of bark and pine needles from their wood pile, arranged them in a loose nest around the embers, and then used her breath to gently fan the coals. The technique was identical to what any experienced outdoorsman might do, but executed by an animal that supposedly couldn't understand fire-making principles. When the kindling caught and began to burn steadily, Luna methodically added larger pieces of wood, building the fire back to sustainable warmth. She had not just maintained the flame. She had actively rebuilt it using techniques that required understanding of combustion principles. The PUPS took the third watch together, and their approach revealed yet another aspect of the pack's intelligence. Scout and Shadow had developed a communication system for their shared duties that involved subtle position changes and quiet vocalizations. One would monitor the fire while the other watched for threats. Then they would switch roles without any apparent signal that Michael could detect. During their watch, Michael observed the young wolves practicing behaviors they had learned from watching their parents. Scout attempted to rebuild the fire when it grew low, using the same technique his mother had demonstrated. His first attempt was clumsy, nearly smothering the flames, but Shadow's encouraging presence allowed him to try again with better success. The learning behavior was fascinating. These pups were not just following instinct, but actively studying human technology and adapting it to their own capabilities. They were problem-solving in real time, building on observations and refining techniques through trial and error. Moonwalker took the final watch before dawn, and his approach was the most vigilant of all. The beta male clearly took his security responsibilities seriously, making regular patrols around their shelter and maintaining constant awareness of sounds and scents that might indicate approaching danger. During his watch period, Moonwalker demonstrated the pack's most sophisticated adaptation to their rescue mission. He had learned to distinguish between the sounds Michael made while sleeping peacefully and the signs of distress that might indicate returning hypothermia or other medical problems. Twice during the night, he alerted Luna when Michael's breathing became irregular, leading to adjustments in the warming formation that restored normal vital signs. As dawn approached, Michael realized he had witnessed something unprecedented in the documented history of human-wildlife interaction. These wolves had not just rescued him. They had developed and implemented a comprehensive care protocol that addressed his medical needs, safety requirements, and basic survival necessities. The Night Watch system revealed the depth of their commitment to his survival. This wasn't a temporary act of mercy, but a sustained campaign to ensure his recovery. They had reorganized their entire pack structure around the needs of a creature from a completely different species. More importantly, they had demonstrated learning capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence. The fire-tending techniques, the medical monitoring, the coordinated watch system, all of these behaviors required understanding of cause and effect, planning for future contingencies, and the ability to adapt learned behaviors to novel situations. As Gray Thunder resumed his position for the morning watch and the other wolves settled down for rest, Michael found himself looking at his rescuers with new eyes. They weren't just intelligent animals following sophisticated instincts. They were thinking beings capable of reasoning, learning, and making complex decisions based on incomplete information. The implications of this revelation would have staggered him under normal circumstances. Right now, he was simply grateful to be alive to witness it. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he was beginning to understand that this experience would change not just his own life, but potentially the way humans understood the intelligence and emotional capacity of the creatures they shared the planet with. The wolves had shown him that the line between human and animal consciousness was far blurrier than he had ever imagined. They had demonstrated empathy, intelligence, and moral reasoning that rivaled anything he might have expected from members of his own species. As the third day of his impossible rescue began, Michael Thompson. The morning of the third day brought Michael's first real test of strength since the rescue began. His core temperature had stabilized, circulation had returned to his extremities, and the fog of hypothermia had completely lifted from his mind. But with returning health came returning hunger, a gnawing emptiness that reminded him how long it had been since his last real meal. Gray Thunder seemed to understand the situation without any communication from Michael. The alpha male had been observing the human's increasing restlessness, the way his hands moved to his stomach, the growing frequency with which he glanced toward the meat the wolves had brought but left largely untouched. The cultural barrier that prevented Michael from eating raw wolf-killed prey was something the pack leader was beginning to comprehend. The solution Gray Thunder devised demonstrated a level of cultural sensitivity that astounded Michael. Instead of simply depositing a fresh kill near the fire as he had done before, the alpha male began a systematic process of food preparation that seemed designed specifically for human consumption needs. First, Gray Thunder selected choice portions of the deer the pack had brought down the previous evening. Lean muscle meat free from the organs and bones that wolves typically consumed first. He used his powerful jaws to strip away fur and connective tissue, creating cuts that resembled something Michael might recognize from his own hunting and butchering experience. Next, the massive wolf carried these prepared portions to flat rocks near the fire, positioning them where the heat would begin the cooking process that humans required. His technique was methodical, almost ritualistic, as if he understood that the transformation of raw meat into cooked food was somehow essential to Michael's species. Luna joined the food preparation effort with her own insights into human needs. She had observed Michael's attempts to collect and melt snow for drinking water, noting his preference for clean, fresh sources over the direct consumption of snow that satisfied the wolves. The alpha female began bringing him chunks of the purest ice she could find, selecting pieces that would melt into the cleanest possible water. The pups contributed to the meal preparation with the enthusiasm typical of their age, but their efforts revealed a sophisticated understanding of human preferences that went beyond simple mimicry. Scout carefully arranged dry kindling around the cooking rocks, creating a system that would maintain steady heat for the extended cooking time that human food seemed to require. Shadow took on the role of quality controller, inspecting each piece of meat with the serious attention of a seasoned cook. She would sniff each portion, occasionally rejecting pieces that carried scents of spoilage or contamination that her sensitive nose detected, but that Michael's dulled human senses might miss. As the meat began to cook over the heated stones, filling their shelter with aromas that made Michael's mouth water, he found himself wrestling with emotions that ranged from gratitude to guilt. These predators were sharing their kill with him, not just offering scraps, but actively preparing food according to his species' requirements. The generosity of the gesture was overwhelming. The cultural significance of the moment wasn't lost on him. In human society, sharing a meal was one of the most fundamental expressions of acceptance and community. These wolves were extending that same invitation across species lines, welcoming him not just as a creature they had rescued, but as a member of their temporary extended family. When the meat was sufficiently cooked, Gray Thunder used his paws to push the portions closer to Michael, then stepped back to give him space to eat. The message was clear. This food had been prepared specifically for the human, and he was expected to consume it without reservation or guilt. Michael's first bite of wolf-prepared venison was a revelation. The meat was perfectly cooked, tender, flavorful, and free from the gamey taste he might have expected from wild game prepared under primitive conditions. The wolves had somehow understood that humans preferred their meat cooked through, seasoned by smoke and heat rather than consumed raw. As he ate, Michael became aware that he was being closely observed by all four wolves. Their attention wasn't predatory or threatening, but rather the focused interest of caregivers monitoring a patient's recovery. They were gauging his response to the food, ensuring that their preparation methods had been successful. The meal became a communion of sorts, a shared experience that transcended the biological boundaries between predator and prey species. Michael ate slowly, savoring not just the food but the unprecedented nature of the moment. He was participating in a wolf pack's meal sharing ritual, something no human in recorded history had ever experienced. Luna's maternal instincts extended beyond the food preparation to encompass the entire dining experience. She positioned herself where she could monitor Michael's eating pace, ensuring he didn't consume too much too quickly after his period of starvation. When he began to eat too rapidly, she made a quiet sound that somehow conveyed the message to slow down. The pup's behavior during the meal revealed their growing attachment to their human pack member. Scout and Shadow ate their own portions while maintaining constant visual contact with Michael, as if ensuring that he was properly participating in the family meal. Their body language radiated satisfaction when he showed obvious enjoyment of the food they had helped prepare. Moonwalker, the most cautious member of the pack, used the mealtime to conduct his own assessment of the situation. The beta male's acceptance of Michael was still conditional, based on ongoing evaluation of the human's behavior and the pack's safety. But watching Michael eat with obvious gratitude, while making no aggressive moves toward the pack members, seemed to be shifting his opinion toward greater acceptance. As the meal concluded, Michael felt a profound shift in his relationship with his rescuers. What had begun as a desperate rescue mission had evolved into something approaching genuine social bonding. The wolves weren't just keeping him alive, they were actively incorporating him into their pack structure in ways that suggested long-term thinking about their association. The food-sharing ritual had established precedents that would shape all their future interactions. Michael had been accepted not as a temporary burden to be endured, but as a member of their extended family deserving of care, protection, and the social bonds that held the pack together. More importantly, the meal had demonstrated the wolves' remarkable capacity for cultural adaptation. They had studied his needs, understood his limitations, and modified their own behavior to accommodate his requirements. The intelligence behind these adaptations suggested cognitive abilities that challenged every assumption Michael had held about the mental lives of wild animals. As he settled back against his rocky shelter, fuller and warmer than he had been since the ordeal began, Michael Thompson found himself part of the most extraordinary interspecies relationship in recorded history. For wild wolves had not just saved his life, they had welcomed him into their family with all the generosity and acceptance that the concept implied. The sound came first as a distant whisper carried on the mountain wind, the mechanical drone of helicopter rotors cutting through the crystalline air of the fourth morning. Michael's heart leaped with the instinctive human response to rescue, but immediately afterward came a crushing wave of conflicted emotion as he looked at his wolf protectors. Gray Thunder's head snapped up at the first hint of the approaching aircraft, his ears rotating to pinpoint the direction and distance of the sound. The alpha male's body language shifted immediately from relaxed vigilance to high alert, every muscle tensing as he evaluated this new potential threat to his pack's safety. The helicopter was still miles away, its sound barely detectable to human ears, but the wolves' superior hearing had given them precious minutes of warning. Luna began moving immediately, using quiet vocalizations to coordinate the pack's response to what they instinctively recognized as human technology and therefore potential danger. Michael watched in fascination and growing dread as the pack implemented what was clearly a well-rehearsed emergency protocol. Scout and Shadow responded to their mother's signals by moving to predetermined positions that would allow them to flee quickly if necessary. Moonwalker took up a sentry position where he could monitor multiple approach routes while remaining hidden from aerial observation. The sound grew steadily louder, joined now by the distant rumble of ground vehicles navigating the mountain roads. Michael recognized the signature of a full-scale search and rescue operation. Multiple helicopters, probably snowmobiles or tracked vehicles, possibly teams on foot with radio communication. Sarah had clearly organized a massive effort to find him. Gray Thunder approached Michael with obvious purpose, his amber eyes reflecting a complex mixture of protective instinct and growing concern. The wolf seemed to understand that the approaching sounds represented Michael's species coming to retrieve him. But the alpha male's body language suggested he viewed this development as a potential threat to the pack's safety rather than a positive resolution to their rescue mission. The internal conflict that had been building in Michael's mind since the first day now crystallized into sharp focus. These wolves had saved his life, shared their food, reorganized their entire pack structure to accommodate his needs, and treated him with a level of care and acceptance that rivaled anything he might have received from his own kind. The approaching rescue represented salvation for him, but could mean death sentences for his protectors. Michael's knowledge of local attitudes toward wolves painted a grim picture of what might happen when the search teams discovered him in the company of a pack. Despite legal protections, wolves in this region were still viewed with suspicion and hostility by many residents. Hunters, ranchers, and even some wildlife officials maintained the old prejudices that cast wolves as dangerous predators requiring elimination rather than protection. The helicopter sound was growing much closer now, accompanied by the distinctive whoop 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 of multiple aircraft conducting a coordinated search pattern. Michael could visualize the scene. Experienced rescue personnel using thermal imaging and aerial observation to scan every valley and ridge for signs of the missing hunter. Luna's maternal instincts were in full display as she moved between her pups and the direction of the approaching sounds. Her body language communicated protective determination mixed with the wisdom of a creature that had learned to fear human intrusion into her territory. She would defend her young against any threat, but she also understood the futility of fighting against overwhelming human technology in numbers. The pup's reaction to the crisis revealed how much they had bonded with their human pack member. Instead of immediately seeking escape routes like experienced wolves might do, Scout and Shadow moved closer to Michael, their body language suggesting they viewed him as part of their family unit that needed protection rather than as the source of the approaching danger. Michael found himself facing an impossible moral dilemma. His own survival instincts urged him to signal the rescue helicopters, to end his ordeal and return to the safety of human civilization. But doing so might doom the creatures that had saved his life. Even if the rescue teams didn't actively harm the wolves, the knowledge of their location and behavior would inevitably lead to increased human interference in their territory. The sound of the helicopters was now close enough that Michael could distinguish between different aircraft. At least two, possibly three helicopters conducting overlapping search patterns. Ground vehicles were also audible, their engines echoing off the canyon walls as they navigated the mountain roads that provided access to the search area. Gray Thunder made a decision that demonstrated both his intelligence and his growing attachment to the human pack member. Instead of leading his family away from the approaching danger, the alpha male positioned himself between Michael and the direction of the sounds, his massive body forming a protective barrier. The gesture was unmistakable. The wolf was prepared to defend his human pack member against the approaching threat, even if that threat came from Michael's own species. The loyalty and courage behind Gray Thunder's stance overwhelmed Michael with emotion. This wild predator, who owed him nothing and had already given him everything, was prepared to risk his own life to protect the human he had chosen to save. The wolf's decision transformed the approaching rescue from salvation into a moral crisis of unprecedented complexity. Moonwalker's behavior added another layer to the developing situation. The beta male had taken up a position where he could observe the approaching aircraft while remaining concealed from aerial detection. His body language suggested he was gathering intelligence about the rescue operation rather than simply preparing to flee, behavior that indicated sophisticated tactical thinking about how to protect both the human pack member and the wolf family. The helicopter sounds were now loud enough that conversation would be difficult, but Michael found himself trying to communicate with his protectors anyway. Using the combination of gestures and vocalizations they had developed over the past 4 days, he attempted to convey his gratitude and his concern for their safety. The wolves' responses suggested they understood both his appreciation and his distress about the approaching situation. As the first helicopter appeared over the ridge line, its bright searchlights cutting through the morning shadows, Michael Thompson faced the most difficult decision of his life. The choice he made in the next few minutes would determine not only his own fate, but the future of the extraordinary family that had welcomed him across the vast divide between species. The sound of his salvation was also the sound of potential doom for the creatures he had come to love as family. In that moment, Michael understood that being rescued was far more complicated than simply being found. The rescue helicopter crested the ridge line like a mechanical dragon, its rotor wash sending snow spiraling in chaotic patterns that transformed the peaceful mountain morning into a scene of controlled chaos. Michael could see the aircraft clearly now, a bright orange search and rescue bird with multiple crew members visible through the windows, their attention focused on the systematic grid pattern that would eventually bring them to his location. Gray Thunder's response to the approaching aircraft revealed the full extent of his protective instincts toward his adopted human pack member. Rather than retreating to a safe distance, as wildlife typically did when confronted with helicopters, the alpha male moved closer to Michael, positioning his massive body as a physical shield between the human and what he perceived as an aerial threat. The gesture was simultaneously touching and terrifying. Michael understood that Gray Thunder was prepared to defend him against the rescue helicopter if necessary, a battle that would be both futile and tragic. The wolf's loyalty had reached a point where he was willing to fight Michael's own species to protect him, regardless of the hopeless odds. Luna's approach to the crisis demonstrated the sophisticated risk assessment capabilities that had kept her pack alive through multiple harsh winters. She had gathered Scout and Shadow close to her, creating a tight family unit ready for rapid evacuation, but she hadn't yet initiated full retreat. Instead, she seemed to be waiting for signals from either her mate or her human pack member about how to respond to this unprecedented situation. The pup's behavior provided the most heartbreaking element of the developing crisis. Scout and Shadow clearly didn't understand why the approaching helicopters represented danger to their family. Their limited experience with human technology hadn't yet taught them to fear aircraft the way adult wolves instinctively did. Instead, they seemed curious about the loud flying objects, occasionally looking up at the sky with the same interest they might show toward large birds. Michael realized that his next actions would determine whether this rescue mission became a celebration of survival or a tragedy of unintended consequences. The wolves had no way of understanding that the approaching humans were coming to help rather than harm, and their defensive responses could easily be misinterpreted by rescue personnel as aggressive behavior requiring immediate countermeasures. The helicopter was now close enough that Michael could see individual crew members through the windows, figures in bright orange flight suits using binoculars and thermal imaging equipment to scan the terrain below. He recognized the methodical precision of professional search and rescue operations, the careful coordination between air and ground teams that maximized the chances of finding missing persons in wilderness areas. But he also understood the mindset that these rescuers would bring to any encounter with wolves. Even well-trained search and rescue personnel typically viewed wild predators as potential threats to be neutralized rather than as possible allies in survival situations. The idea that wolves might have rescued and protected a human would be so far outside their experience that they might not even consider it as a possibility. Michael found himself caught between two worlds, two sets of loyalties that seemed fundamentally incompatible. His human identity and survival instincts demanded that he signal the rescue helicopter, ending his ordeal and returning to the safety of civilization. But his growing bond with the wolf pack, his gratitude for their life-saving intervention, and his understanding of their vulnerability to human prejudice created equally powerful arguments for protecting their secrecy. The moral complexity of the situation was staggering. These wolves had demonstrated intelligence, empathy, and moral reasoning that rivaled anything Michael had seen from members of his own species. They had sacrificed their own comfort and safety to save his life, reorganizing their entire pack structure around his needs and treating him with a level of care that went far beyond simple animal instinct. Now he faced the possibility that his rescue might doom them to death or displacement. Even if the search teams didn't immediately harm the wolves, the knowledge of their location and behavior would inevitably lead to increased human interference in their territory. Researchers, wildlife officials, and curiosity seekers would disturb their hunting grounds, potentially driving them away from territory they had claimed and defended for generations. Grey Thunder seemed to sense Michael's internal conflict. The alpha male's amber eyes held a depth of understanding that was almost human in its complexity. The wolf appeared to recognize that the approaching aircraft represented Michael's path back to his own kind, and despite the potential danger to his own pack, he wasn't trying to prevent that reunion. Instead, he seemed to be offering his protection during whatever transition was about to occur. The sound of the helicopter was now loud enough to make verbal communication difficult, but Michael found himself trying to speak to his wolf protectors anyway. The words came out as a mixture of English and the wordless vocalizations he had learned to use with the pack, a desperate attempt to communicate concepts that transcended the normal boundaries between species. Luna's response to his obvious distress was immediate and touching. The alpha female approached and pressed against his side in a gesture of comfort and support that the pack had used throughout his recovery. Her message was clear. Whatever decision he made, the pack would support him. They had committed themselves to his welfare, and that commitment extended to respecting choices they might not fully understand. Moonwalker's position as the pack's scout and early warning system had given him a clear view of the approaching rescue operation. The beta male's body language suggested he had identified at least 2 helicopters and multiple ground vehicles converging on their general area. The scale of the search effort spoke to the dedication of Michael's family and friends, but also to the magnitude of the disruption that was about to occur in the wolves' territory. The first helicopter was now close enough that Michael could see the crew members pointing in his direction. They had spotted either his fire or his movement, and within minutes, they would be circling his exact position. The moment of decision had arrived, and there was no more time for internal debate about the competing loyalties that were tearing his heart apart. As the rescue aircraft began its final approach, Michael Thompson faced a choice that would define not only the rest of his own life, but potentially the future relationship between his species and the intelligent, compassionate creatures that had saved him. The decision he made in the next few seconds would echo through generations of both human and wolf memory. The sound of salvation had become the sound of moral crisis, and Michael found himself wishing that being rescued could be as simple as just being found. The rescue helicopter descended in a controlled spiral, its rotor wash creating a whirlwind of snow and debris that forced everyone in the clearing to shield their eyes. Michael watched through the chaos as the aircraft settled into a landing pattern 50 yards away, close enough for immediate evacuation, but far enough to avoid the worst of the downdraft effects on his makeshift shelter. Grey Thunder's reaction to the landing helicopter was immediate and instinctive. The massive alpha male moved to place himself directly between the aircraft and his pack, his hackles raised and his body language radiating protective aggression. The wolf's amber eyes tracked the movement of the crew members as they prepared to exit the helicopter, evaluating each figure as a potential threat to his adopted family unit. Luna responded to her mate's defensive posture by gathering the pups closer to her flanks, creating a tight protective formation that could move quickly in any direction if the situation deteriorated. Her maternal instincts were in full control now, overriding any curiosity about the strange flying machine in favor of ensuring her offspring's safety. The helicopter's engines wound down to an idle, reducing the noise level enough for shouted communication, but maintaining enough power for immediate takeoff, if necessary. Michael could see 4 crew members inside the aircraft: pilot, co-pilot, a medic in bright orange gear, and what appeared to be a search coordinator with radio equipment and maps spread across his lap. The first person to exit the helicopter was Tom Bradley, a veteran search and rescue specialist whom Michael recognized from previous hunting seasons. Tom's expression showed the relief of a successful mission as he spotted Michael clearly alive and apparently mobile near his shelter. But that relief transformed quickly to shock and alarm as he took in the full scene before him. 4 wolves surrounded the missing hunter, not at a distance, not displaying the wariness that wild animals typically showed toward humans, but positioned as protectors around Michael's shelter. The alpha male stood directly between the rescue team and the human they had come to save, his posture unmistakably territorial and defensive. Tom's hand moved instinctively toward the flare gun on his belt, a standard piece of search and rescue equipment that could serve as both signaling device and wildlife deterrent. His training had prepared him for many scenarios involving lost hunters, but finding one apparently held captive by a wolf pack was not among the standard protocols. The medic, a woman Michael didn't recognize, exited the helicopter with medical equipment, but stopped short when she saw the wolves. Her professional assessment of the situation was visible in her body language. She was evaluating Michael for signs of injury, while simultaneously trying to understand why he wasn't attempting to escape from what appeared to be a potentially lethal situation. Michael realized that his next actions would determine whether this rescue became a tragedy or a triumph. The rescue team's interpretation of the scene depended entirely on his behavior and his ability to communicate the extraordinary nature of his relationship with the wolves. Their preconceptions about human-wolf interactions would predispose them to see threat where there was actually protection. Rising slowly to his feet, Michael raised his hands in a gesture of calm intended for both the rescue team and the wolves. His movement caused Gray Thunder to shift position slightly, maintaining his protective stance while allowing Michael more freedom to communicate with the approaching humans. The search coordinator, still inside the helicopter, was speaking rapidly into his radio equipment, clearly describing the unusual scene to ground units and other aircraft in the search pattern. Michael could imagine the conversations taking place across the rescue network as word spread that the missing hunter had been found in the company of wolves. Tom Bradley approached cautiously, his experienced eyes taking in details that painted a picture far different from what his initial assumptions had suggested. Michael's shelter showed signs of careful construction and maintenance that went beyond what a hypothermic person could have managed alone. The fire had been tended with skill and supplied with precisely the right materials for sustained burning. More significantly, the wolves' behavior defied every pattern Tom had learned during 20 years of mountain rescue operations. Wild wolves encountering humans typically fled immediately or, if cornered, displayed clear signs of fear-based aggression. These animals showed neither flight response nor defensive aggression. Instead, they appeared to be guarding the human. The medic's professional training allowed her to observe details that others might miss. Michael's condition was far better than would be expected from someone who had survived 4 days of winter exposure in the mountains. His color was good, his movements coordinated, and his mental state appeared alert and responsive. Someone or something had been taking very good care of him. Michael took a step toward the rescue team, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid triggering defensive responses from either the humans or the wolves. Gray Thunder matched his movement, maintaining his protective position while allowing the interaction to proceed. The wolf's behavior suggested sophisticated understanding of the social dynamics at play. The search coordinator had finished his radio communications and was now observing the scene directly, his binoculars focused on the interaction between Michael and the wolf pack. His expression reflected the struggle to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior in this region. Tom's approach stopped at what he judged to be a safe distance from the wolves, close enough for conversation, but far enough to avoid triggering a defensive response from animals he still viewed as potentially dangerous. His voice carried clearly across the clearing when he finally spoke, though his words were carefully chosen to avoid sudden movements or aggressive tones. Michael's response to Tom's cautious greeting was the first step in what he knew would be a complex process of explaining the unexplainable. His voice carried clearly across the distance between them, but his words were chosen as much for the wolves' benefit as for the humans. He needed to communicate the extraordinary nature of his rescue, while simultaneously reassuring his protectors that these new humans represented help rather than threat. The pup's reaction to the human voices provided the first crack in the rescue team's preconceptions about the situation. Scout and Shadow showed curiosity rather than fear toward the new arrivals, their body language reflecting the confidence that came from being part of a secure pack structure rather than the wariness of wild animals encountering potential predators. Luna's maternal assessment of the situation was visible in her gradual relaxation of the tight protective formation she had maintained around her offspring. The alpha female's superior ability to read emotional states and intentions allowed her to recognize that these humans, while foreign and potentially dangerous, were not displaying the aggressive postures associated with immediate threat. The helicopter's continued idle created a background of mechanical noise that seemed to emphasize the surreal nature of the encounter. Here, in one of the most remote wilderness areas of Wyoming, representatives of two entirely different worlds were meeting under circumstances that challenged every assumption both species held about the other. Michael found himself serving as translator between worlds, trying to bridge the gap between human skepticism and wolf loyalty, between scientific training and unprecedented experience. The success or failure of this communication would determine whether his rescue marked the beginning of a new understanding between species or became another tragic example of human fear destroying what it didn't understand. As Tom Bradley took another cautious step forward and Gray Thunder shifted position to maintain his protective stance, the most extraordinary rescue in recorded history balanced on the edge of triumph or tragedy, depending entirely on the next few minutes of interspecies diplomacy. Tom Bradley's 20 years of search and rescue experience had taught him to expect the unexpected in wilderness situations. But nothing had prepared him for the scene that continued to unfold before him. As he studied the interaction between Michael and the wolves, details emerged that challenged everything he thought he knew about predator-human relationships in the wild. The medic, Dr. Sarah Chun, had completed her preliminary assessment of Michael's condition from a distance and was clearly struggling to reconcile her observations with standard wilderness survival protocols. A person who had spent 4 days exposed to winter conditions in the Wyoming mountains should be showing signs of severe hypothermia, dehydration, frostbite, and malnutrition. Instead, Michael appeared to be in remarkably good condition. The search coordinator, Captain Jake Morrison, had established radio contact with the ground units and other aircraft in the search pattern. His communications were carefully neutral, describing the location of the found subject without elaborating on the unprecedented circumstances of the discovery. Morrison understood that the extraordinary nature of the situation required careful documentation and expert consultation before any official reports were filed. Michael's attempt to explain his rescue to the approaching team was complicated by his awareness that every word was being evaluated by both species for signs of threat or deception. His account of the wolves' life-saving intervention sounded incredible even to himself, but the evidence supporting his story was visible in every aspect of his survival setup. Grey Thunder's protective stance had not wavered despite the presence of multiple humans and mechanical equipment that would normally send any wild wolf fleeing for the safety of deeper wilderness. The alpha male's commitment to defending his adopted pack member overrode millennia of evolutionary programming that mandated avoidance of human contact. Tom's professional skepticism battled with the mounting evidence that supported Michael's impossible account. The shelter construction showed signs of materials and techniques that went beyond what any human could have managed while suffering from exposure. The fire had been maintained with a precision and consistency that suggested continuous tending by someone with extensive outdoor experience. Dr. Chen's medical training led her to focus on the physical evidence of Michael's survival. His clothing showed wear patterns consistent with 4 days of outdoor exposure, but his skin showed none of the damage associated with severe hypothermia. His hydration appeared adequate, and his mental state was alert and responsive. Someone had been taking very good care of him. The pup's behavior continued to undermine the rescue team's preconceptions about the situation. Scout and Shadow displayed none of the fear or aggression that wild wolves typically showed toward humans. Instead, they seemed almost protective of Michael, occasionally moving closer to him when the humans' voices became louder or more animated. Morrison's radio communications with Base Camp were becoming increasingly complex as he tried to describe a situation that had no precedent in search and rescue protocols. The ground units were requesting permission to approach, but Morrison was reluctant to authorize additional personnel until he better understood the dynamics at play between Michael and the wolves. Luna's assessment of the rescue team revealed her sophisticated ability to read human emotional states and intentions. The alpha female had gradually relaxed her defensive posture as she recognized that these humans, while foreign and potentially dangerous, were displaying concern for Michael rather than aggression toward the pack. Tom made the decision to approach closer, moving with the slow, deliberate pace that experienced outdoorsmen used around wildlife. His movement caused Grey Thunder to adjust position slightly, but the wolf maintained his protective stance without showing increased aggression. The alpha male seemed to understand that this human was attempting communication rather than presenting immediate threat. Michael's detailed account of his rescue began to change Tom's perspective on the situation. The hunter's description of the wolves' behavior patterns, their apparent understanding of human needs, and their systematic approach to his care painted a picture of intelligence and empathy that went far beyond typical animal instinct. Dr. Chen's request to examine Michael more closely created the first real test of the interspecies trust that had developed over the past 4 days. Her approach with medical equipment would require the wolves to allow a stranger into their protective formation, something that went against every instinct that had kept them alive in the wild. The helicopter's continued idle provided an auditory backdrop that emphasized the surreal nature of the encounter. The mechanical noise of human technology contrasted sharply with the natural sounds of the mountain environment, symbolizing the clash between two different approaches to survival and cooperation. Morrison's growing understanding of the situation led him to make a crucial decision about how to handle the unprecedented rescue. His communications with Base Camp began to emphasize the need for wildlife experts and behavioral specialists rather than additional tactical personnel. The situation required scientific expertise rather than standard emergency protocols. Michael found himself serving as mediator between two worlds that had rarely intersected in positive ways. His ability to communicate with both the rescue team and the wolf pack would determine whether this extraordinary example of interspecies cooperation became a model for future human-wildlife relationships or was lost to misunderstanding and fear. The standoff continued as both sides evaluated the unprecedented situation. Each group trying to protect their own members while respecting the obvious bonds that had developed between human and wolves. The next few minutes would determine whether this rescue became a celebration of cross-species cooperation or a tragedy born of mutual misunderstanding. As Tom Bradley prepared to take another step toward Michael and Gray, Thunder shifted to maintain his protective position. The balance between trust and suspicion hung in the mountain air like the mist that surrounded the peaks. The most extraordinary rescue in recorded history was about to reach its critical moment, where actions would speak louder than words in determining the fate of all involved. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Scout, the larger of the two pups, had been watching the tense standoff between the human rescue team and his pack with the uncomplicated perspective of youth. While the adults on both sides maintained their cautious defensive positions, the young wolf saw only an opportunity for the kind of social interaction that had characterized his relationship with Michael over the past 4 days. Moving with the confident curiosity that had defined his personality since birth, Scout walked directly toward Tom Bradley. The pup's body language radiated none of the wariness that adult wolves typically displayed around humans. Instead, he approached with the same open friendliness he had shown toward Michael, treating the rescue specialist as simply another potential pack member. Tom's reaction to the approaching wolf pup revealed both his professional training and his personal character. Despite every instinct that warned against allowing a wild predator to approach unchecked, he remained motionless, recognizing that any sudden movement or aggressive gesture could shatter whatever delicate trust was developing in the situation. Gray Thunder's response to his son's bold initiative demonstrated the sophisticated nature of wolf pack dynamics. Rather than immediately calling the pup back to safety, the alpha male closely monitored both Scout's approach and Tom's reactions, ready to intervene instantly if the interaction showed signs of becoming threatening to his offspring. Dr. Chun watched the interspecies contact with the trained eye of someone who understood both medical protocols and animal behavior. Her observation of Scout's approach provided valuable data about the wolves' current stress levels and their assessment of a human rescue team as potential threats or allies. Scout's investigation of Tom Bradley followed the same pattern he had used when first encountering Michael. The pup circled cautiously, gathering scent information and evaluating the human's emotional state through body language and chemical signals. His behavior suggested that he was conducting a deliberate assessment rather than simply acting on impulse. The moment of contact came when Scout, apparently satisfied with his evaluation, approached close enough to sniff Tom's outstretched glove. The interaction lasted only seconds, but it represented a breakthrough in the standoff that had developed between the two groups. A wild wolf had voluntarily made peaceful contact with a human stranger. Tom's whispered comment about the pup's fearlessness carried across the clearing to where Michael stood with the adult wolves. His words reflected the amazement of someone whose professional experience had never included voluntary contact with wild predators, yet who recognized the extraordinary nature of what was occurring. Shadow's decision to join her brother in investigating the humans provided additional evidence that the pack's attitude toward these newcomers was fundamentally different from their typical response to human intrusion. The smaller pup's approach was more cautious than Scout's, but it demonstrated the same lack of fear that had characterized their interactions with Michael. Morrison's radio communications with Base Camp took on new urgency as he attempted to describe the unprecedented behavior of the wolves. His reports emphasized the peaceful nature of the contact, while requesting guidance from wildlife experts who might have experience with similar situations. Though all involved recognized that no similar situations existed in the literature. Luna's gradual relaxation of her defensive posture reflected her assessment that these humans, while foreign and potentially dangerous, were responding appropriately to her offspring's overtures. The alpha female's body language suggested growing confidence that this encounter might proceed without violence or trauma to her family. Dr. Chen's request for permission to approach Michael with medical equipment represented the next critical test of the interspecies trust that was developing. Her movement toward the group would require the adult wolves to allow a complete stranger into their protective formation while carrying unfamiliar objects that could be perceived as threats. Michael's role as translator became crucial as he attempted to explain Dr. Chen's intentions to his wolf protectors using the combination of gestures, vocalizations, and body language that had developed between them over the past 4 days. His success in communicating across species barriers would determine whether the medical examination could proceed peacefully. Gray Thunder's decision to step aside and allow Dr. Chen's approach demonstrated a level of trust that went beyond anything documented in human-wolf interaction studies. The alpha male's willingness to permit a stranger near his adopted pack member represented a profound act of faith in Michael's judgment and the peaceful intentions of the rescue team. The medical examination itself became a fascinating display of cross-species cooperation. Dr. Chen worked methodically to assess Michael's condition while remaining constantly aware of the wolves positioned around her. Her professional focus on medical protocols was balanced by her recognition that any sudden movement or unexpected action could instantly change the dynamic of the situation. Scout and Shadow's behavior during the examination provided additional evidence of their extraordinary comfort with human presence. Rather than retreating to a safe distance as wild animals would typically do, the pups maintained their positions close to Michael, occasionally sniffing Dr. Chen's equipment with obvious curiosity rather than fear. The pups' relaxed attitude toward the strangers began to influence the adult wolves' assessment of the situation. Luna's maternal protectiveness remained high, but her body language suggested growing acceptance that these humans represented help rather than threat to her adopted pack member. Tom's growing understanding of the wolves' intelligence and emotional capacity led him to begin treating them as individuals with distinct personalities rather than simply as wild animals following instinctual behavior patterns. His observations of their coordinated responses and obvious concern for Michael's welfare painted a picture of cognitive abilities that challenged conventional assumptions about animal consciousness. Dr. Chen's preliminary medical assessment confirmed what the visual evidence had already suggested. Michael had received care during his ordeal that went far beyond what he could have provided for himself while suffering from exposure. His condition was remarkably good for someone who had spent 4 days in winter wilderness conditions, suggesting that someone or something had been actively managing his recovery. The breakthrough, represented by the pup's peaceful contact with the rescue team, created new possibilities for resolving the standoff that had developed around Michael's rescue. The successful interaction demonstrated that cooperation between humans and wolves was possible, even under the stressful circumstances of an emergency situation. As Dr. Chun completed her preliminary examination and Tom Bradley gained confidence in the peaceful intentions of the wolf pack, the foundation was laid for a resolution that could honor both Michael's need for rescue and the wolves' need for protection from potential retaliation or disruption of their territory. The extraordinary rescue was evolving into an unprecedented example of interspecies cooperation, with implications that extended far beyond the immediate situation in the Wyoming wilderness. The accident happened during what should have been a moment of triumph. As Dr. Chun completed her medical assessment and the rescue team began to understand the extraordinary nature of Michael's survival, Gray Thunder made a critical error that would test every bond that had been forged over the past 4 days. The alpha male had been monitoring the perimeter of their shelter area with his characteristic vigilance when he noticed movement in the forest that didn't match the patterns of the known rescue operation. His protective instincts immediately activated, and he moved to investigate what might be another human approaching their location from an unexpected direction. The terrain around their shelter was treacherous even under normal conditions, made more dangerous by the recent storm that had left every surface covered with ice and hidden obstacles. Gray Thunder's usual sure-footedness was compromised by his focus on the potential threat, causing him to misjudge a step on what appeared to be solid ground, but was actually a thin crust of ice over a sharp depression between two boulders. The sound of the alpha male's distress call cut through the mountain air like a blade, instantly commanding the attention of every member of both species present at the rescue site. Luna's response was immediate and dramatic, her protective instincts overriding any concern for the human observers as she rushed to her mate's location. Michael's reaction to Gray Thunder's injury was visceral and immediate. The wolf who had saved his life, who had reorganized his entire pack structure to accommodate a helpless human, was now the one in desperate need of assistance. The role reversal was both ironic and heartbreaking, but it also presented an opportunity to demonstrate the reciprocal nature of the bond that had developed between them. Tom Bradley's assessment of the injured wolf revealed the complexity of the situation they now faced. Gray Thunder had wedged his right rear paw between two ice-covered rocks, and his attempts to free himself had only worsened the injury. The paw was clearly broken, possibly in multiple places, and the alpha male's ability to lead his pack through the demanding terrain of their territory was now seriously compromised. Dr. Chin's medical training included veterinary experience from her early career, but treating a wild wolf under field conditions presented challenges that went far beyond her normal emergency protocols. The injured animal was still potentially dangerous despite the bonds he had formed with Michael, and any treatment would require a level of trust and cooperation that had never been achieved between humans and wild wolves. Luna's distress at her mate's injury was evident in every aspect of her behavior. The alpha female alternated between aggressive protection of her injured partner and desperate attempts to communicate the severity of the situation to the humans who might be able to help. Her body language spoke of a creature caught between her natural wariness of human intervention and her recognition that her mate needed assistance beyond what the pack could provide. The pups' reaction to their father's injury revealed the depth of the family bonds that held the pack together. Scout and Shadow positioned themselves protectively around Gray Thunder, their young voices joining their mothers in vocalizations that carried distress signals across the mountain landscape. Their obvious grief and concern provided additional evidence of the emotional complexity that characterized wolf family relationships. Michael found himself in the unprecedented position of advocating for veterinary care for a wild predator to a rescue team that was already struggling to comprehend the extraordinary circumstances of his survival. His argument for treating Gray Thunder's injuries was based not only on gratitude for his life-saving intervention, but on the recognition that the wolf's injury could doom the entire pack if it prevented him from leading them through the coming winter. Morrison's radio communications with Base Camp took on new urgency as he attempted to explain why a search and rescue operation had evolved into a wildlife emergency requiring veterinary expertise. His request for guidance from wildlife officials and veterinary specialists reflected the unprecedented nature of a situation where humans were being asked to provide medical care to wild animals that had demonstrated remarkable intelligence and cooperation. Tom's initial resistance to treating the injured wolf was based on sound safety protocols and legal concerns about interfering with wildlife. His training had emphasized that humans should maintain strict boundaries with wild animals, avoiding interventions that could alter natural behavior patterns or create dangerous dependencies on human assistance. But the evidence before his eyes was challenging every assumption about human-wildlife relationships that had guided his professional career. These wolves had demonstrated intelligence, empathy, and cooperative behavior that went far beyond anything documented in the scientific literature. More importantly, they had saved a human life when they could easily have ignored his plight or viewed him as potential prey. Dr. Chen's willingness to attempt treatment of Gray Thunder's injury represented a professional and personal risk that went beyond her normal emergency protocols. Treating a wild wolf under field conditions without proper equipment or backup support could result in serious injury to herself and potentially create legal complications with wildlife authorities. However, her medical oath to prevent suffering where possible, combined with her growing understanding of the extraordinary intelligence and emotional capacity of these animals, led her to advocate for attempting the treatment despite the risks involved. Her assessment of Gray Thunder's injury suggested that without intervention, the wolf would likely die from infection or inability to hunt effectively. The logistics of treating an injured wild wolf presented challenges that required creative problem-solving from all involved. Gray Thunder would need to be immobilized during the treatment process, but chemical tranquilization was not available under field conditions. The procedure would require the wolf's voluntary cooperation based on trust that had been built over days of interaction with Michael. Michael's role as intermediary between species became crucial as he attempted to communicate the treatment plan to Gray Thunder and the pack. Using the combination of gestures, vocalizations, and body language that had developed during his rescue, he worked to convey that the humans intended to help rather than harm the injured alpha male. Luna's decision to allow human intervention in her mate's medical crisis represented perhaps the most profound act of interspecies trust in recorded history. The alpha female's willingness to permit strangers to approach and handle her injured partner violated every survival instinct that had kept her pack alive. But it also demonstrated her recognition that human technology might be the only hope for saving Gray Thunder's life. The pup's behavior during the treatment preparation provided emotional support that transcended species boundaries. Scout and Shadow positioned themselves where they could maintain visual contact with their father while remaining out of the way of the treatment process, their presence providing comfort to the injured wolf and demonstrating family loyalty that rivaled anything found in human relationships. As Dr. Chun prepared her improvised surgical kit and Michael worked to gain Gray Thunder's cooperation for the treatment process, the rescue operation evolved into something unprecedented in human-wildlife relations. The successful treatment of the injured wolf would require cooperation, trust, and empathy that challenged every assumption about the boundaries between human and animal intelligence. The mountain clearing had become a stage for one of the most extraordinary examples of interspecies cooperation in recorded history, where the debt of life-saving rescue was being repaid through voluntary medical assistance that violated every protocol but honored every principle of compassion and reciprocal loyalty. The improvised surgical procedure began with Dr. Chen's careful assessment of Gray Thunder's injured paw, while Michael maintained physical contact with the wolf's head, providing comfort and reassurance during what must have been an intensely stressful experience for the wild animal. The alpha male's willingness to remain still during the examination demonstrated a level of trust that defied everything the rescue team thought they knew about wildlife behavior. Gray Thunder's injury was more complex than initially apparent. The wolf's paw had become wedged between ice-covered rocks in such a way that his struggles to free himself had caused multiple fractures in the small bones of his foot. Dr. Chin's examination revealed at least 3 separate breaks, along with torn ligaments and severe bruising that had already begun to swell the entire lower leg. Luna's behavior during her mate's treatment revealed the sophisticated emotional intelligence that characterized the pack's response to crisis situations. The alpha female positioned herself where she could monitor both the medical procedure and the surrounding area for potential threats, maintaining her protective duties while allowing the humans to work on her partner's injury. Tom Bradley's role evolved from skeptical observer to active assistant as he recognized the seriousness of Gray Thunder's condition and the genuine nature of the interspecies cooperation that was developing. His wilderness first aid training proved valuable in supporting Dr. Chin's more advanced medical skills, and his growing respect for the wolves' intelligence made him increasingly committed to the success of the treatment. The PUPS' contribution to their father's medical care demonstrated behaviors that went far beyond simple family loyalty. Scout and Shadow took turns bringing clean snow that Dr. Chun could use for irrigation and cooling, positioning the frozen water where it would be easily accessible during the procedure. Their understanding of cause and effect in medical treatment suggested cognitive abilities that challenged conventional assumptions about animal intelligence. Dr. Chin's improvised surgical technique required creativity and adaptation that pushed the boundaries of field medicine. Without proper anesthesia, surgical instruments, or sterile conditions, she had to rely on Gray Thunder's cooperation and her own skill to realign the broken bones and stabilize the fractures using materials salvaged from the rescue equipment and natural resources available in their mountain location. Michael's role as translator and comfort provider proved crucial to the success of the medical procedure. His ability to communicate reassurance to Gray Thunder through touch and vocalization helped keep the injured wolf calm during painful manipulations of the broken bones. The bond that had developed between human and wolf over the past 4 days provided a foundation of trust that made the treatment possible. Morrison's communications with Base Camp had evolved into requests for specialized equipment and expertise that went far beyond normal search and rescue protocols. His reports described a situation that had no precedent in emergency response literature, where wildlife medical care had become integral to the successful completion of a human rescue mission. The splinting process required innovation and cooperation from all involved parties. Dr. Chun used lightweight aluminum from the rescue team's equipment combined with natural materials provided by the wolves to create a stabilizing structure that would protect the fractured bones while allowing Gray Thunder enough mobility to remain with his pack. Luna's assistance in the splinting process demonstrated her understanding of the treatment's purpose and her commitment to her mate's recovery. The alpha female helped position Gray Thunder's leg during the procedure and even brought additional materials that Dr. Chun incorporated into the splint design. Her behavior suggested that she recognized the humans were working to heal rather than harm her partner. The pain management aspect of Gray Thunder's treatment presented the greatest challenge, as pharmaceutical intervention was not available under field conditions. Dr. Chin relied on pressure point techniques adapted from human medicine, while Michael provided continuous comfort through physical contact that seemed to have genuine analgesic effects on the injured wolf. Tom's growing appreciation for the wolves' intelligence led him to begin documenting the treatment process with his emergency camera equipment. His photographs and notes would provide unprecedented documentation of interspecies medical cooperation, potentially revolutionizing understanding of animal cognitive abilities and emotional capacity. Scout's behavior during his father's treatment revealed learning patterns that suggested the ability to understand and remember complex procedures. The young wolf observed every aspect of Dr. Chen's work with intense focus, as if memorizing techniques that might be useful in future emergencies. His attention to detail exceeded what would be expected from simple curiosity. The infection prevention measures required creativity and the wolves' continued cooperation in maintaining the cleanliness of Gray Thunder's wound site. Dr. Chun established a protocol for wound care that included regular cleaning and monitoring, but its success would depend on the pack's understanding of the importance of keeping the injured area protected from contamination. Shadow's contribution to her father's recovery came in the form of emotional support that transcended species boundaries. The young female remained in constant physical contact with Gray Thunder during the most painful aspects of the procedure, providing comfort that seemed to have measurable effects on his stress levels and cooperation with the treatment. The bandaging process became a collaborative effort that demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of both species when faced with unprecedented challenges. Dr. Chen's medical expertise, combined with the wolves' understanding of their pack members' needs and limitations to create a treatment plan that balanced medical necessity with the practical requirements of wilderness survival. Gray Thunder's response to the completed treatment provided evidence of the procedure's success and the depth of his trust in his human caregivers. Despite the pain and stress of the surgical intervention, the alpha male's behavior toward the rescue team remained calm and cooperative, suggesting that he understood their intentions and appreciated their efforts on his behalf. The recovery period would test the bonds that had developed between species and the practical limits of interspecies medical cooperation. Gray Thunder's healing would require continued care and monitoring that went beyond what any wild animal had ever received from humans, while maintaining the pack structure and territorial requirements that were essential to the wolf's survival. As Dr. Chun completed the bandaging and Michael helped Gray Thunder find a comfortable resting position, the mountain clearing had witnessed one of the most extraordinary examples of cross-species medical cooperation in recorded history. The successful treatment represented not just technical achievement, but a profound demonstration of empathy and reciprocal care that challenged every assumption about the boundaries between human and animal compassion. The injured wolf's recovery would serve as an ongoing test of whether the remarkable cooperation that had developed during this emergency could be sustained over the longer term, and whether it might serve as a model for future human-wildlife relationships based on mutual respect and understanding rather than dominance and exploitation. The transformation in the rescue team's understanding began subtly during Gray Thunder's recovery period, as they witnessed behaviors that challenged every assumption they had held about the cognitive and emotional capabilities of wild animals. What had started as a standard search and rescue mission was evolving into a profound educational experience about the nature of intelligence and compassion across species boundaries. Tom Bradley's documentation of the wolves' post-treatment behavior revealed patterns of care and cooperation that rivaled anything found in human medical literature. Luna had assumed primary responsibility for her mate's wound care, carefully cleaning the injured area with a precision and gentleness that demonstrated both understanding of infection prevention and genuine concern for Gray Thunder's comfort. Dr. Chen's observations of the pack's coordinated response to their leader's injury provided insights into wolf social structure that went far beyond what behavioral scientists had previously documented. The wolves had reorganized their entire daily routine around Gray Thunder's recovery needs, adjusting hunting patterns, territorial patrols, and family interactions to accommodate his limited mobility. The PUP's role in their father's recovery demonstrated learning behaviors that suggested abstract thinking and planning capabilities. Scout and Shadow had established a rotation system for providing companionship to the injured alpha male, ensuring that he was never left alone while also maintaining their own play and exploration needs. Michael's position as intermediary between species had evolved into something approaching professional collaboration as he helped the rescue team understand the nuances of wolf pack behavior and communication. His growing fluency in reading the wolves' emotional states and intentions provided valuable insights that enhanced the effectiveness of Gray Thunder's ongoing treatment. Morrison's communications with wildlife experts at base camp had generated intense interest from researchers who recognized the unprecedented nature of the documented interspecies cooperation. The detailed reports and photographic evidence were challenging established theories about animal intelligence and the potential for meaningful relationships between humans and wild predators. The healing process itself became a study in comparative medicine as Dr. Chen observed how the wolves' natural healing practices complemented her own treatment protocols. Luna's instinctive knowledge of which plants and minerals might aid in Gray Thunder's recovery provided additional therapeutic options that enhanced the effectiveness of the improvised surgical repair. Gray Thunder's response to his treatment revealed personality characteristics that the rescue team had not expected to find in a wild predator. The alpha male's patience with the daily wound care routine, his obvious gratitude for the pain relief provided by human intervention, and his continued protective attitude toward Michael demonstrated emotional complexity that rivaled human relationships. Tom's growing respect for the wolves' intelligence led him to begin treating them as individuals rather than simply as wildlife specimens. His interactions with each pack member became increasingly personalized as he learned to recognize their distinct personalities, preferences, and communication styles. The logistics of maintaining Gray Thunder's medical care while respecting the pack's need for territorial mobility presented challenges that required creative problem-solving from all involved. The wolves couldn't abandon their territory for extended periods, but Gray Thunder's injury limited his ability to travel over the rough terrain that defined their mountain habitat. Dr. Chen's adaptation of human physical therapy techniques for use with an injured wolf demonstrated the universal principles underlying rehabilitation medicine. Her exercises designed to maintain Gray Thunder's muscle tone and joint flexibility while his bones healed were modified based on wolf anatomy and behavioral patterns, creating a hybrid treatment approach that drew from both human and veterinary medicine. Luna's participation in her mate's physical therapy revealed her sophisticated understanding of the treatment's purpose and importance. The alpha female actively encouraged Gray Thunder's cooperation with the exercise routine, using a combination of social pressure and emotional support that enhanced his motivation to participate in activities that were often uncomfortable or frustrating. The pack's collective response to the ongoing human presence in their territory demonstrated adaptability that exceeded anything documented in wildlife behavior studies. Rather than viewing the rescue team as temporary intruders to be tolerated, the wolves began incorporating the humans into their daily routines in ways that suggested genuine social acceptance. Scout's fascination with human technology and medicine led him to become an active participant in his father's treatment process. The young wolf's ability to learn and remember complex medical procedures suggested cognitive abilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about the learning capacity of wild animals. Shadow's emotional support for her injured father revealed the depth of family bonds that existed within the wolf pack structure. Her constant attention to Gray Thunder's comfort and her obvious distress when he showed signs of pain demonstrated empathy and concern that transcended simple pack loyalty. Morrison's role as liaison between the field team and wildlife authorities became increasingly complex as the implications of their discoveries began to be understood by the broader scientific community. The unprecedented documentation of interspecies cooperation was generating requests for extended observation and study that went far beyond the scope of a normal rescue operation. The daily routine that had developed around Gray Thunder's care created opportunities for deeper understanding between humans and wolves that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The extended contact allowed both species to observe and learn from each other in ways that challenged preconceptions and revealed previously unknown capabilities. Tom's assessment of the pack's problem-solving abilities during Gray Thunder's recovery period provided evidence of reasoning and planning skills that exceeded what behavioral scientists had thought possible in wild animals. The wolves' ability to adapt their hunting strategies, modify their territorial behavior, and coordinate complex care routines demonstrated cognitive flexibility that rivaled human capabilities. Dr. Chin's documentation of the healing process revealed the effectiveness of combining human medical technology with natural healing practices that the wolves had developed through evolutionary experience. The hybrid approach to Gray Thunder's recovery was producing results that exceeded what either purely human or purely natural treatment might have achieved alone. The transformation in the rescue team's understanding of wolf intelligence and emotional capacity was creating profound changes in their perspectives on human-wildlife relationships. What had begun as a simple rescue mission was evolving into a paradigm shift that would influence wildlife management policies and conservation strategies for generations to come. As Gray Thunder's condition continued to improve under the combined care of human medicine and wolf family support, the mountain clearing had become a laboratory for exploring the possibilities of cooperation between species that had traditionally been viewed as incompatible. The lessons being learned had implications that extended far beyond the immediate situation, offering hope for a new model of human-wildlife coexistence based on mutual respect and understanding. The healing process was transforming not just the injured wolf, but the entire understanding of what was possible when intelligence and compassion transcended the boundaries between species. The approaching necessity of separation cast a shadow over the mountain clearing that had become a unique sanctuary of interspecies cooperation. As Gray Thunder's condition stabilized and Michael's strength returned to full capacity, both humans and wolves began to confront the reality that their extraordinary partnership would soon have to end. The rescue team's schedule demanded departure within the next day. As weather conditions were forecast to deteriorate, an extended presence in the wilderness posed increasing risks to personnel and equipment. Morrison's communications with base camp emphasized the need to complete the evacuation while conditions remained favorable for helicopter operations. Michael's emotional struggle with leaving his wolf family was evident in every aspect of his behavior. The man who had entered these mountains as a solitary hunter was preparing to leave as someone profoundly changed by his experience of cross-species fellowship and mutual dependence. The bonds he had formed with Gray Thunder, Luna, Scout, and Shadow represented relationships that had no parallel in his previous experience. Gray Thunder's recovery had progressed to the point where he could bear weight on his injured paw, though full mobility would require several more weeks of healing. The alpha male's ability to lead his pack through the demanding winter season ahead remained uncertain, but Dr. Chin's treatment had given him a fighting chance at full recovery. Luna's behavior during the preparation for departure revealed her sophisticated understanding of the temporary nature of their interspecies alliance. The alpha female had begun gradually resuming normal pack routines and territorial behaviors, as if preparing her family for the return to their traditional way of life without human assistance. The pup's response to the impending separation was the most heartbreaking aspect of the situation. Scout and Shadow had bonded with Michael in ways that transcended normal wildlife-human relationships, treating him as a permanent member of their pack family. Their obvious confusion and distress at the signs of departure preparation spoke to the emotional costs of the extraordinary relationships that had developed. Tom's documentation of the pack's pre-departure behavior provided valuable insights into wolf emotional responses and their capacity for understanding complex social situations. The wolves' ability to recognize that the humans were preparing to leave and their varied responses to that recognition demonstrated cognitive and emotional sophistication that exceeded scientific expectations. Dr. Chin's final medical assessment of both Michael and Gray Thunder provided objective evidence of the success of their unprecedented collaboration. Michael's condition was excellent despite his ordeal, while Gray Thunder's injury was healing better than could have been expected under purely wild conditions. The practical arrangements for departure required careful consideration of the wolves' safety and future welfare. The rescue team's knowledge of the pack's location and behaviors could potentially expose them to increased human interference, research pressure, or hostile attention from those who viewed wolves as threats rather than intelligent beings deserving of protection. Morrison's communications with wildlife officials had already generated significant interest from researchers who wanted to study the pack and document their remarkable behaviors. The challenge would be ensuring that scientific curiosity didn't disrupt the wolves' natural lifestyle or expose them to dangers they had successfully avoided through generations of careful wilderness survival. Michael's attempts to explain the approaching departure to his wolf family using their developed communication system represented one of the most complex interspecies conversations ever attempted. His efforts to convey concepts of human obligation, family responsibility, and the temporary nature of their association stretched the boundaries of what was possible between human and wolf understanding. The pack's response to Michael's explanation revealed their remarkable capacity for comprehending abstract concepts. Luna's body language suggested understanding of the necessity for separation, while Gray Thunder's behavior indicated acceptance of the situation despite obvious reluctance to see his human pack member leave. Scout's reaction to the departure preparations demonstrated the intensity of the bonds that had formed between the young wolf and his human companion. The pup's obvious distress at the prospect of separation spoke to the genuine affection and loyalty that had developed during their time together. Shadow's behavior revealed a different, but equally profound response to the impending departure. The smaller pup had become more clingy and attention-seeking, as if trying to make herself indispensable to Michael in hopes of preventing the separation she sensed was coming. The question of ongoing contact between Michael and the pack presented complex ethical and practical challenges. While both sides had obviously benefited from their association, maintaining regular contact could disrupt the wolves' natural behaviors and potentially expose them to dangers from humans who might not share Michael's respect for their intelligence and autonomy. Tom's perspective on the situation had evolved from professional skepticism to genuine advocacy for the wolves' protection and welfare. His recommendations for follow-up monitoring and protection protocols reflected his growing understanding of their remarkable capabilities and vulnerability to human interference. Dr. Chin's assessment of the long-term implications of their interspecies medical collaboration suggested possibilities for future cooperation between human medicine and natural healing practices. The success of combining human technology with wolf family support in Gray Thunder's treatment opened new avenues for wildlife rehabilitation and care. The emotional preparation for departure required all participants to confront the temporary nature of their extraordinary relationship. The bonds that had formed across species lines were real and profound, but they existed within the context of two very different ways of life that could intersect only under exceptional circumstances. Morrison's final preparations for evacuation included protocols designed to protect the wolves' location and minimize future human interference in their territory. The documentation of their remarkable behaviors would be carefully controlled to prevent exploitation while allowing scientific study of their unprecedented cognitive and emotional capabilities. As the sun began to set on what would be their last night together, the mountain clearing held a gathering unlike any other in recorded history. Humans and wolves who had saved each other's lives, learned from each other's wisdom, and formed bonds that transcended every assumption about the boundaries between species, prepare to return to their separate worlds enriched by the knowledge that such connections were possible. The approaching separation would test the strength of relationships that had developed in defiance of millions of years of evolutionary history, while the lessons learned from their time together would influence both species' understanding of intelligence, compassion, and the possibilities for cooperation across the vast divide that had traditionally separated human and wild animal consciousness. The final evening in the mountain sanctuary began with a ritual that seemed to emerge naturally from the unique bonds that had formed between two species over the past 5 extraordinary days. As darkness settled over the Wyoming wilderness, humans and wolves gathered around the fire that had symbolized their cooperation since Michael's rescue, creating a circle of warmth and companionship that transcended every traditional boundary between civilization and wild nature. Gray Thunder positioned himself carefully near the flames, his injured paw still requiring caution, but his dignity intact as the alpha male who had led his pack through an unprecedented crisis. The healing was progressing well, and Dr. Chin's final examination had confirmed that the wolf would likely recover full mobility within the coming weeks, though the splint would need to remain in place for several more days. Luna settled beside her mate with the quiet satisfaction of a leader who had successfully navigated her family through dangerous territory. Her acceptance of a human presence around their fire represented a level of trust that violated every survival instinct her species had developed over millennia of avoiding human contact. The pups had positioned themselves where they could maintain physical contact with both their parents and Michael, creating a bridge of fur and warmth that connected the two species in the most literal sense. Scout's head rested against Michael's leg, while Shadow pressed close to Tom Bradley, who had become her favorite among the rescue team members. Tom's amazement at finding himself accepted as a pack member, even temporarily, was evident in his careful attention to wolf etiquette and his obvious respect for the social dynamics that governed the group. His transformation from skeptical rescuer to genuine advocate for the wolves represented a profound shift in perspective that would influence his professional work for years to come. Dr. Chen used the quiet evening hours to complete her documentation of Gray Thunder's treatment and recovery, creating a medical record that would stand as testimony to the possibilities of interspecies cooperation in healthcare. Her notes captured not only the technical aspects of the treatment, but also the emotional and behavioral elements that had made the healing possible. Morrison's role as chronicler of the expedition had evolved beyond simple rescue documentation to encompass a record of one of the most remarkable interspecies encounters in recorded history. His photographs and detailed reports would provide evidence of animal intelligence and emotional capacity that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness and communication across species boundaries. Michael found himself struggling to articulate the depth of gratitude he felt toward his wolf family, knowing that no words in any human language could adequately express what their intervention had meant to him. The wolves had not simply saved his life. They had opened his understanding to possibilities of connection and communication that he had never imagined existed. The evening conversations among the humans took on a philosophical tone as they processed the implications of their extraordinary experience. Each team member had been changed by their contact with the wolves, their preconceptions challenged, and their understanding of animal intelligence fundamentally altered. Gray Thunder's behavior during the final evening revealed aspects of his personality that had not been evident during the crisis of his injury. The alpha male displayed a contemplative quality, as if he too was processing the significance of the relationships that had formed and the knowledge that had been exchanged between species. Luna's maternal presence extended beyond her own offspring to encompass the human members of their temporary extended pack. Her attention to Michael's emotional state during the preparations for departure demonstrated empathy and concern that transcended species boundaries. The fire itself had become a symbol of the cooperation that had developed between humans and wolves, tended by members of both species in a rotation that honored the contributions each had made to their survival and healing. The flames that had once represented desperate human need for warmth had evolved into a beacon of interspecies understanding. Scout's behavior during the evening reflected his youth and the intensity of his bonds with the human pack members. The young wolf's reluctance to settle for sleep, his constant attention to the humans' activities, and his obvious distress at the signs of impending departure spoke to the genuine affection that had developed. Shadow's response to the final evening was characterized by increased clinginess and attention-seeking behavior directed toward all the human team members. Her instinctive understanding that this gathering was somehow different, somehow final, led her to seek maximum contact and reassurance from the humans she had come to trust and love. The natural sounds of the mountain night provided a backdrop to the unique gathering, reminding all participants of the wild setting in which their extraordinary relationships had developed. The howls of distant wolf packs, the rustle of nocturnal wildlife, and the whisper of wind through the trees emphasized both the beauty and the challenges of the wilderness environment. Tom's reflections on the experience focused on the implications for wildlife management and conservation policy. The intelligence and emotional capacity demonstrated by the wolves challenged every assumption about the mental lives of wild animals and suggested the need for fundamental changes in how humans approached wildlife protection and habitat management. Dr. Chen's medical perspective on the interspecies cooperation had revealed possibilities for combining human technology with natural healing practices that could revolutionize both veterinary and human medicine. The success of Gray Thunder's treatment using hybrid approaches suggested new avenues for research and clinical practice. Morrison's documentation efforts had captured not only the events, but also the emotional dynamics of the unprecedented encounter. His records would provide future researchers with insights into the possibilities for meaningful communication and cooperation between humans and wild animals. The gradual settling of the group into sleep positions maintained the integrated pack structure that had developed over their days together. Humans and wolves arranged themselves around the fire in ways that provided mutual warmth and security, creating a living symbol of the cooperation that had emerged from crisis. Michael's final conscious thoughts before sleep focused on the transformation he had experienced, from solitary hunter to member of an interspecies family that had challenged every assumption he had held about the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. The knowledge that tomorrow would bring separation from the creatures who had saved and changed his life filled him with both gratitude and profound sadness. As the fire burned low and the mountain night settled around the unique gathering, the final evening of one of the most extraordinary rescue missions in history drew to a close. The relationships formed across species lines had created memories and insights that would influence both human and wolf behavior long after the immediate circumstances that had brought them together had passed into history. The last night of their interspecies family represented both an ending and a beginning, as the lessons learned from their cooperation would ripple outward to influence wildlife policy, scientific understanding, and the fundamental human conception of intelligence and emotion in the natural world. The morning of departure arrived with the crystalline clarity that followed major storms in the Wyoming mountains, as if the wilderness itself was providing perfect conditions for the conclusion of the most extraordinary rescue in recorded history. The helicopter engines warming up in the distance created a mechanical counterpoint to the natural sounds of the awakening forest, symbolizing the return to separate worlds that had briefly intersected in unprecedented harmony. Michael's final preparations for leaving his mountain sanctuary were conducted under the watchful eyes of his wolf family, each member of the pack responding differently to the obvious signs of imminent separation. The gear he packed carried the sense and memories of 5 days that had transformed his understanding of intelligence, compassion, and the possibilities for connection across species boundaries. Gray Thunder's presence at the departure preparations demonstrated both his recovery progress and his continued role as pack leader despite his injury. The alpha male's careful movements showed respect for his healing paw while maintaining the dignity and authority that had carried his family through the crisis of Michael's rescue and his own medical emergency. Luna positioned herself where she could monitor both the departure activities and her family's responses to the emotional stress of separation. The alpha female's behavior reflected the wisdom that had guided her decision to allow human intervention in their pack dynamics, understanding that some connections transcended normal territorial and species boundaries, even when they could not be permanently maintained. The PUPS reactions to the departure preparations provided the most heartbreaking element of the morning's activities. Scout and Shadow had spent the early hours trying to maintain constant physical contact with Michael, as if their presence might somehow prevent the separation they instinctively understood was approaching. Tom Bradley's role in coordinating the evacuation was complicated by his emotional investment in the welfare of the wolf pack that had accepted him as a temporary member. His professional responsibilities demanded efficient execution of the rescue mission, while his personal feelings urged him to find ways to maintain protective oversight of the remarkable animals he had come to respect and care for. Dr. Chen's final medical checks of both Michael and Gray Thunder provided objective confirmation of the success of their unprecedented cooperation. Michael's condition was excellent despite his wilderness ordeal, while Gray Thunder's injury was healing better than could have been expected under normal wild conditions, testament to the effectiveness of combining human medicine with pack support. Morrison's documentation of the departure process focused on capturing the emotional dynamics of separation between species that had formed genuine bonds of affection and mutual respect. His photographs and notes would provide future researchers with insights into the capacity for meaningful relationships between humans and wild predators. The logistics of departure required careful choreography to minimize trauma to the wolves while ensuring safe evacuation of the rescue team. The helicopter's approach and landing procedures were modified to reduce noise and visual disruption that might cause panic among animals that had learned to trust but not necessarily understand human technology. Michael's attempts to communicate farewell messages to his wolf protectors using the gestural and vocal language they had developed together represented one of the most complex interspecies conversations ever documented. His efforts to convey gratitude, affection, and promises of protection stretched the boundaries of what was possible between human and animal understanding. Gray Thunder's response to Michael's farewell demonstrated the depth of the bonds that had formed between them during their shared crisis. The alpha male's gentle physical contact with his human pack member, combined with vocalizations that carried obvious emotional content, suggested recognition of both the necessity and the sadness of their separation. Luna's behavior during the farewell process revealed her sophisticated understanding of the situation's complexity. The alpha female's body language communicated acceptance of the necessity for Michael's departure while also expressing her own attachment to the human who had become part of her family structure. Scout's reaction to the approaching separation was the most intense and difficult to witness. The young wolf's obvious distress at the prospect of losing his human companion demonstrated the genuine affection and dependency that had developed during their time together, relationships that challenged every assumption about the emotional lives of wild animals. Shadow's response to the departure preparations involved increased attention-seeking behavior directed toward all the human team members, as if she hoped that demonstrating her affection might somehow convince them to stay or take her with them. Her behavior revealed the depth of trust and attachment that had formed across species lines. The helicopter's final approach to the evacuation site required the wolves to withdraw to a safe distance, creating physical separation that emphasized the emotional gulf that was opening between the two groups. The mechanical noise and rotor wash transformed the peaceful mountain clearing into a zone of controlled chaos that highlighted the technological divide between human and wolf worlds. Tom's final instructions to his team included protocols for protecting the wolves' location and minimizing future human interference in their territory. His professional experience in wilderness management now carried additional weight from his personal understanding of the pack's remarkable intelligence and emotional capacity. Dr. Chen's medical equipment, still carrying traces of Gray Thunder's scent and the evidence of their successful interspecies medical collaboration, was carefully packed as precious documentation of possibilities that had never before been achieved between human veterinary science and wild animal cooperation. Morrison's role as the mission's official chronicler had evolved to encompass responsibility for ensuring that the story of their extraordinary encounter would be told in ways that protected the wolves while advancing scientific understanding of animal intelligence and interspecies cooperation possibilities. The actual moment of departure was marked by behaviors from both species that demonstrated the depth of the relationships that had formed and the genuine sadness that accompanied their necessary dissolution. Michael's last physical contact with each pack member was conducted with the solemnity of a ritual farewell between family members who might never meet again. Gray Thunder's final gesture toward Michael involved the presentation of a pine branch that the wolf had carefully selected and carried to the evacuation site. The offering appeared to be both a gift and a symbol of the natural world that had become their common ground during the rescue period. Luna's farewell behavior included vocalizations directed toward the departing humans that carried emotional content recognizable across species boundaries. Her sounds communicated concepts of gratitude, affection, and protective blessing that transcended the normal territorial warnings associated with wolf responses to human presence. As the helicopter lifted off from the mountain clearing, carrying Michael Thompson back to human civilization, both species watched the separation with obvious emotion. The wolves' howling farewell echoed across the mountain peaks, while the humans' silent tears acknowledged the end of relationships that had challenged every assumption about the boundaries between wild and civilized consciousness. The departure marked not just the end of an extraordinary rescue mission, but the beginning of a new chapter in human-wildlife relationships that would be shaped by the unprecedented cooperation and mutual respect that had developed in the Wyoming wilderness. The lessons learned would ripple outward to influence conservation policy, scientific research, and fundamental human understanding of intelligence and emotion in the natural world. 6 months after his rescue, Michael Thompson stood before a packed auditorium in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, addressing wildlife biologists, conservation officials, and local ranchers who had gathered to hear firsthand testimony about the most documented case of interspecies cooperation in modern history. The photographs and video recordings from his rescue had already begun to revolutionize scientific understanding of wolf intelligence and emotional capacity. The Wyoming Wolf Protection Initiative that Michael had founded immediately upon his return to civilization had already secured federal protection for an expanded territory around the area where his rescue had taken place. The legislation specifically cited the unprecedented intelligence and cooperative behavior demonstrated by the pack as justification for enhanced conservation measures that went beyond traditional wildlife management approaches. Dr. Chin's medical documentation of gray thunder's treatment had been published in both veterinary and human medical journals, opening new research avenues into the possibilities of combining technological medicine with natural healing practices. Her ongoing collaboration with wildlife rehabilitation centers had already produced improved treatment protocols for injured wild animals based on the success of their mountain surgery. Tom Bradley's transformation from traditional search and rescue specialist to advocate for intelligent wildlife protection had led to his appointment as director of a new interagency program focused on developing protocols for human-wildlife emergencies that recognize the cognitive and emotional capabilities of wild animals. His training programs now included modules on interspecies communication and cooperation. Morrison's documentation had become the foundation for a comprehensive research program studying wolf pack dynamics and intelligence, with funding from universities and conservation organizations worldwide. The photographs and behavioral observations from the rescue had provided evidence that was reshaping academic understanding of animal consciousness and social complexity. The broader impact of Michael's rescue extended far beyond scientific circles into policy and cultural change throughout the region. Local attitudes toward wolves had begun shifting as community members learned about the intelligence, empathy, and cooperative behavior demonstrated by the pack that had saved a human life. Remote monitoring equipment installed near the pack's territory, with Michael's advocacy and funding, had documented Gray Thunder's complete recovery from his injury and the pack's continued successful adaptation to their mountain environment. The wolves had returned to normal territorial and hunting behaviors while maintaining the enhanced cooperative patterns that had emerged during the rescue period. Scout and Shadow, now approaching adult size and developing their own distinct personalities within the pack structure, had shown continued evidence of the learning and problem-solving abilities that had first emerged during their interactions with the human rescue team. Their development was being studied as evidence of how early interspecies contact might influence cognitive development in wild animals. Luna's role as alpha female had been strengthened by her successful leadership during the crisis period, and her pack had grown with the addition of new pups whose early development was being influenced by the enhanced cooperative and problem-solving behaviors that had become part of the family's cultural inheritance. The scientific community's response to the documented evidence from Michael's rescue had led to fundamental revisions in theories about animal intelligence, emotional capacity, and the potential for meaningful communication between humans and wild predators. Research programs at major universities were now studying the implications for conservation, wildlife management, and basic understanding of consciousness. Michael's personal transformation from traditional hunter to wildlife advocate had influenced hunting culture throughout the region, with many local sportsmen adopting new approaches to wilderness interaction that emphasized respect for animal intelligence and the potential for cooperation rather than simple predator-prey relationships. The educational programs that had emerged from Michael's rescue story were reaching school children throughout Wyoming and neighboring states, teaching new generations about the possibilities for respectful coexistence with intelligent wildlife. The story had become a cornerstone of curricula focused on environmental ethics and interspecies understanding. Legal precedents established through the wolf protection legislation had begun influencing wildlife law throughout the western United States, with several states adopting enhanced protection measures for species that demonstrated high levels of intelligence and social complexity. The legal recognition of animal cognitive abilities was reshaping conservation policy nationwide. International attention to the rescue story had led to collaborative research programs with wildlife specialists in other countries, comparing the documented wolf behaviors with intelligence studies of other predator species. The implications were contributing to global discussions about animal rights and conservation priorities. Michael's ongoing connection to the mountain territory where his rescue had occurred involved regular visits to the region for research support and conservation advocacy. Though direct contact with the pack was carefully avoided to prevent disruption of their natural behaviors. The wolves' welfare remained his primary concern in all activities related to their protection. The economic impact of the enhanced wolf protection measures had been more positive than anticipated, with ecotourism and research activities bringing new revenue streams to local communities while maintaining the wilderness character that attracted visitors. The story of the rescue had become a significant draw for educational and wildlife tourism. The psychological and emotional impact on Michael himself had been profound and lasting. His experience of interspecies family bonding had changed his fundamental understanding of consciousness, communication, and the possibilities for connection across the boundaries that typically separated human and animal experience. As Michael concluded his presentation to the Jackson Hole audience, he reflected on the ripple effects that had emerged from 5 extraordinary days in the Wyoming wilderness. A desperate survival situation had evolved into one of the most significant advances in human understanding of animal intelligence and the potential for cooperation across species boundaries. The story of his rescue had become more than just an individual survival narrative. It had evolved into a catalyst for fundamental changes in how humans understood their relationship with the natural world and the intelligent creatures that shared their planet. The lessons learned in that mountain clearing continued to influence scientific research, conservation policy, and cultural attitudes throughout the region and beyond. The wolves who had saved his life had inadvertently saved something larger. The possibility for a new model of human-wildlife relationships based on mutual respect, understanding, and recognition of the intelligence and emotional capacity that existed throughout the natural world. Their act of compassion had opened doorways to cooperation that would influence generations of both species, proving that the boundaries between human and animal consciousness were far more permeable than anyone had previously imagined. Michael Thompson's rescue had become a turning point in the long history of human-wildlife interaction, demonstrating that survival sometimes required not dominance over nature, but partnership with the intelligent life that surrounded human civilization in the wild spaces of the world.